Video. Yeah, if you can. No. You can sit anywhere, and I have a, no, I have a,
After you,
I have a press thing for you if they ask. I don't think they'll ask me here.
Natasha.
I have a press pass for you, but I don't think
And
they,
then
oh yeah,
Mark.
you have that, never mind. Which one? Sweet.
So Natasha,
I'm tired.
Mark, then it's
I'm all
Aaron,
over.
and it's Sunny, David.
I know, I've been sweating, and this doesn't breathe. It does not breathe.
If I'm looking at the right copy of this slide. I think there's only one copy, right? Okay.
What?
So
I have
this
this.
is the right copy, right? So after Perry, it's Natasha, then Mark, then Aaron,
Okay.
then Sunny, and then David at the end. And Sunny.
Let's see. How do I have? So, what do you have?
I had after Perry, it's Natasha,
Okay, hold on. After you,
then Perry,
then Perry.
Natasha,
Shoot, yeah. Okay. Let's see.
then there's Natasha, then there's Mark.
Oh, I remember we did switch the order, didn't we? Yep.
And then we got Aaron, then we got
Yep.
Sunny, and then
Yep.
we got David.
Yep. David's last. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome.
What time is
We
it?
got it.
Hey, look at that.
We did it.
We did it. Oh, Miss America's here. Or Statue of Liberty. Oh, Lady of Liberty. And let's see. Yay. Testing 1, 2, 3. Are we good? Thank you, thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the library. Welcome to San Diego Comic-Con. You guys made it through Friday. How are you feeling? Woohoo! Yeah! Did you see all the wonderful stuff on the outside and like, you know, those who could go in the inside, like all that like crazy, I don't know, 12-foot, how tall was that? Has anyone seen the 12-foot Bowser? Oh my God, 14. Awesome. All right, well, let's start this panel. Welcome, thank you again, San Diego Comic-Con, the Central Library for having us. We really appreciate this subject that is very dear to our hearts on how to support Black, Indigenous, people of color students using pop culture, art, and comic books. My name is Lorraine Garrison. I am a school psychologist here in San Diego County, and I want to start off this panel by honoring land that we are currently on with the Kumeya. And so you are on ancestral land. We want to thank and appreciate so much what they have given us. And so if you look up the hashtag Honor Native Land to find out what land you are on, or look at the maps that you can find, you can honor the land that way. All right, here we have a wonderful lineup of panelists, and so what we're gonna do is we're gonna front load you what we're talking about, why it's important, and then I'm just gonna let everyone tell their personal stories. So once again, my name is Lorraine Garrison. I'm a school psychologist, I'm an author, and I'm the co-founder of Little Brainstorm. We write books to support social emotional learning for kids in school. So our first two books we have 4 books out in Amazon. We're getting a rebrand. The first one is called Brain Boy and Bob and the Very Hungry Maggot. And the second one is The First Day of School Jitters. Yes, please feel free to take a picture of the QR code to go to our Linktree and check us out. All right, I'm gonna do a brief, quick overview of adverse childhood experiences. Do you all know what that is? Who knows what that is? Sweet, okay. So essentially, Kaiser and the CDC did a study from 1995 to about 97, over 20,000 folks, and they found out throughout with all the studies that they did, regardless of your cultural background, your socioeconomic background, everything that might differentiate people, they found that if you had high ACEs under these 3 categories, abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction, you most likely will have a higher higher chance of having depression, asthma, heart disease, and cancer and diabetes. So this is from the CDC, including health risks like smoking, heavy drinking, drug use, unemployment, less than a high school education, and no health insurance. And so here's a list of all the other things that suicidal attempts, missing work, having frequent job turnovers, for example, STDs. And so why that's really important, as a school psychologist, it's important for me to understand where a child is coming from, because who's aware of the school to prison pipeline? Oh, great, so I don't need to do the 101. So as we know, a lot of folks who have these high ACEs are most likely to be in prison or not having strong job opportunities, or even homelessness because of that. So a lot of it also with mental health issues. So here are all the statistics, but we know this, so any questions on that? Sweet, okay. So what we are looking at is how to close that gap. We must be trauma informed. This is some of the recommendations that a lot of us on the panel will make, and so trauma informed and using restorative justice. Are you guys aware of being trauma informed? Yes. And then are you guys aware of being what what restorative justice is? Okay, essentially the skinny of it is that instead of looking at punitive rules, having people come together and understanding why a person is feeling this way, and helping the community come together, the folks coming together in order to support why that person was upset or was not feeling heard. So then I take it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for that wonderful setup, Lorraine. Can y'all hear me?
Press the button. There you go.
Okay.
Ooh.
Thank you again, Lorraine, for that wonderful setup and for having us all here today. Thank you all for attending. My American name is Dr. Elizabeth Smith. My Korean name is Yi Pang-shi, Yi being the family name. Pronouns she, hers. And I'm considered 1.5 generation, half Korean. 1.5 generation meaning that my family and I moved to the States in early childhood. So my mother is Korean, my father is a disabled US Army veteran. There are a lot of neurodiverse presentations in my family, including dyslexia, autism, trauma, etc. And most of them are formally diagnosed on my father's side, not so much on my mom's side. And why that is an important piece that we should also talk about. In addition to why, growing up, that my brother and I were fascinated with comics and so interested in pop culture in so many ways, including that it was a great comfort to us to be able to read comics and to think, oh, our father's gonna be okay. He's gonna come home because he's a superhero and he's saving lives. And, oh, our uncles, they're gonna be okay. They're gonna come home too, right? They are powerful. And so imagining those stories for us was so important. Also important to discuss, though, is how there wasn't very much representation growing up. So I was fortunate enough, because I also had my grandparents on my mother's side that I mostly lived with. We actually drove for hours to a larger town, to a bigger city, to rent tapes of Korean television, K-dramas and music and things. And we would come home and watch these tapes. And of course, being the kids and me being the oldest granddaughter, I was in charge of rewinding the tapes. But, excuse me. But my friends and all people that I went to school with, they were not being exposed to this, right? So even though I was getting positive ideas and messages about my culture, a lot of my friends had a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of stereotypical things and microaggressions that they would say to me or about my family, as I'm sitting down translating a lot of these different components. So being very culturally informed as a psychologist is so important, trauma-informed, social justice informed, being neurodivergent affirming has been so, so important. But I think it's also important to discuss how very few BIPOC clinicians there are, and how few in the psychology realm, there are less than 4% of psychologists that are Asian American. And so as we talk about a lot of these things, it's also important to talk about the eyes of oppression. So that this happens not only systemically, institutionally, interpersonally between people, as well as internally within ourselves, and how we obtain these different messages. And so when we look at Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, if those are not familiar with this model, is that the child is in the center. And those that the child immediately interacts with, family members, school systems, right? Those are going to be around the most closest layer to the child. And then outside of that are the layers of who is interacting with them. So what is a parent's job treating them like? What is the school system saying is okay to put in the curriculum? Are they saying it's okay to teach, different histories as an elective? Or is this like part of the core curriculum, right? So there's a lot of different components to that, as well as the outermost layer being the chronosystem, or the time period, the paradigm in which people are growing up. And this is another model that was drawn by an artist that depicts a more modern day aspect of what this can look like for children now and for people right now. So obviously things like the Black Lives Matter movement, Stop Asian Hate, are going to really impact that. The fact that they are saying, hey, you know what? Asian American history needs to be taught in schools is going to be critical in shaping people's lives right now, right? So all of these different policies are so, so important. And as we continue with that, it's important to recognize that we all grew up within these systems as well. And so our limitations as to what we have been encountering is also a part of that. It's also important to keep in mind, sometimes this is called the pyramid of hate, sometimes pyramid of discrimination, pyramid of violence, that at the bottom layer are these microaggressions, these beliefs, right, that might occur, and how they bridge ways to allow for further aggression to occur. Whether that is like more overt things, or even more covert things like not considering someone for job opportunity, or having them interview for a job even though the job is already filled, but just because you want to say that you interviewed enough minority people, right? So there are going to be lots of different components to this. This happens internally, this happens interpersonally, as well as laterally. Laterally meaning within the same group. So, for instance, women being aggressive towards other women, right? This is another comic. So the prior one was from Uncanny X-Men, 81. This is from Josh Luna, depicting what this is like to internalize these messages. And the next one comes from American-born Chinese, where, this is the next one. Yeah, you're doing great. Just one more click. So the character in the blue is the main character of the story, and even though he's sitting alone and all the other kids are hanging out, there's this new kid that comes in, and he doesn't even really want to associate himself with him because, right, you want to be associating with levels of power. And so he comes at him with, you're in America now, you got to speak English. And that's another form of that aggression. This comic here is from Good Talk, Memoir and Conversations by Mir Jacob, where she's talking to her son about racial questions. And it's important to keep in mind that kids are naturally going to have these questions. And if they are approaching you with them, that's wonderful. They see you as a safe person to ask these questions to. Up there previously was the 15 characteristics of white supremacy, and that's super important because we want to talk about how these things are happening not only within classrooms for young children, but also what happens when they grow up, right? What is happening that keeps people out of certain positions of power, right? What is the power hoarding, the perfectionism, et cetera? And then we have some quick antidotes to show appreciation, to share power, to make sure that we are being conscientious of these things, and that we're doing this from a young age to help other people so that there are more content creators, so that our stories can be shared, so that little kids can grow up with more hope. And that, we want to do this with compassion and understanding that we also grew up with a lot of this, within our lives as well, and that we have to undo that. We have to unlearn it, and that we have to move forward with this And the next comic is just, you know, a little bit of hope. I want to see what happens if I just keep trying. Nope.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was very moving and very educational. And next on the panel is Perry Clark. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, I have to introduce myself this time? You said on that yesterday.
Fine.
I'm gonna take that time back. No,
You want me to do an intro for
Yeah,
you?
I'll do
Okay.
let's have that.
So Perry Clark and I have been friends for, I don't know, a couple of years now. And Perry and I met on a group on Facebook called Geek Therapists, Geek Therapy. It's the green background. Feel free to join it as educators. We welcome everybody who supports all things geeky and using it in your practice. And so Perry also runs a podcast called Untying Knots. So not only is he a therapist, but he is also a wonderful, wonderful podcast. We have lots of fun, and it's amazing to be able to share these panels, I should say, with you, and I'm looking forward to do more. So that is my introduction. Do you like that?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So let's go on to the next slide. So, as Elizabeth was just talking about the numbers of ways that we deal with the eyes of oppression and the way that white supremacy is working at, one of the biggest mechanisms that is used by that is the mechanism of shame. And what you see up on the screen is the definition of shame. And draw your attention to the first line, especially that last part that says impropriety. Now, what is impropriety? It is something that does not match the dominant norm, the neurotypical norm, the racial norm that is put forth. Anytime that is brought forth, it is the idea that somehow it is now less, and it is a place that is attacked. I just want you to just let that sink about. What does that mean to be attacked for somehow not being able to change your skin color, your sexuality, the way your brain is developed, that you are somehow improper because of that aspect of nature. And that is the biggest mechanism used in any attack against a BIPOC individual, both in the larger society, within the interrelationship, just as Elizabeth was talking about with the female to female, as well as even inside the family. So when working and dealing with any youth, one of the biggest questions you really need to ask is, how is shame being used against them? Because especially a 5-year-old is not going to have the same understanding that a 20-year-old is going to have about what's actually going on. And it becomes much more personal to the 5-year-old. Because the sense of self, as by the structure of the universe, their world is much smaller. So that attack has much more meaning. And especially from the idea of authority and power. If it's coming from their parents, if it's coming from their pastors, especially if it's coming from their teachers. That is one of the biggest things we have to be aware of. Next slide. Okay, actually. So that now becomes the issue of masking and or code switching, depending on the situation. And all of these take a physiological toll. Now, as we were talking about with Laurent, was the aspect of the ACEs. The ACEs is a perfect example of where that shame is now taking on a manifestation. Whether it is anxiety, whether it is depression, whether it is that aspect of the failing grades, that sense of not being able to do anything. All of those become the mechanisms of shame that is being applied to the children, to the teenagers, and very much to every single adult in this country and by the world. So being aware of that is very key, even in the work that I do in therapy, is how is that sense of shame applying to disenfranchise them from who they are, from the places they can have pride. Now, a few of the images that are up there are examples of places where we're dealing with this balancing point between masking, code switching, and the physical toll. So the first one up there is from Lovecraft Country, if you've seen it, and this is the character story of Ruby Baptiste, who, in the process of the story, gets the opportunity to see the world as a white woman. And the question being is, what price is she given to be able to keep having that ability? Ultimately, it's sacrificing her family and those that she has connection with. Equally, the next one, we have the scene from Star Trek Next Generation, Worf's discombination. This is him having to basically give up his entire people to maintain a secret. Now, that's a decision he willingly took on, but that's an aspect of multiple of the rest of his culture does not know why he took that decision. And they shame him for it, attack him as being less because they don't know what he did to protect them. And he's living with that his entire time until we get to Deep Space Nine. And the next stop we have from Get Out. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen that, and I'm not going to try and spoil it there, but we have a classic example of the attack that goes on within one's own culture and the inability to trust ones within your own culture because they will be shaming you. And some of the mechanisms of shame that often comes up in one's own culture can be the aspect of how light or dark you are. Where were you in relationship in the family order? So it can vary, and shame is a highly overused mechanism. And it is a weapon that is, and it has literally been weaponized for centuries against people because it's weaponizing the relationship. Let's go to the next slide. You're already ahead of me there. So what I put up here is at least 3 examples of people taking pride, which is one of the mechanisms that counterbalances shame. And our entire thing of why we are all here is our interest in the various geek and nerd cultures that we have. We have all found a way that these characters that we embody bring us pride. So Miles Morales taking the leap of faith at the end of it as his version of Spider-Man, stepping into his power. Angela Bassett as Marie Laveau, stepping into her spirituality and her power there. And this last one, this is my version of Commander Shepard when I'm playing Mass Effect. So the fate of the universe is being saved by a black man. And this is where I get to be in that story and take pride in that story. Next one. All right, so wrapping up, so we're going to be talking about cosplay here, which is another of our examples where we're having the issues of pride. And once he comes back in here, I will point him out. We have a very noted black cosplayer here too for this presentation. But the playing of cosplay, if you think about any time you are reading any type of material, it's not so much the aspect of you're seeing that character, you're seeing yourself in that character. And cosplay is that chance of bringing that in out of our mental space into our physical space. And it's something that we're improving in recognition of the power it gives. Now, one of the key things I want to put up there is about the issue of blackface. Why is that different than what is being done? Because ultimately, blackface is also attacking the aspect of a race to the image. That means that they cannot see themselves as any other form of this character. Such as one of the things you see up there is the woman who is dressed up as Captain America. She's not trying to be masculine. She's trying to be herself as seeing that character. So when we're talking about cosplay, we're looking at that aspect. How do we have pride as seeing ourselves as that character? And that character goes on and transcends race and sexuality. So with that, be very conscious of asking the question is how is shame being used against this child, this teenager, this individual, if you want to be able to help and support them. So I turn that over now to Natasha.
Thank you so much. And that being said, I'll do a quick introduction to Natasha. Natasha works for Insomniac Games. She is a developer and an artist, and she actually drew the mural in the Miles Morales PS5, the Easter egg that if you play the video game, she is the author of that. So take it away.
Hello all. So I'm Natasha Lee, and I'm currently in games, but I didn't always know that I could be in games. And so I've been playing video games for as long as I can remember. I feel like I came out of the womb with a controller, and I've always been into comic books, anime. It's been a big staple of our family. We used to have family game nights with, Sega Saturn or just anything, board games, and but going through life, my parents wanted to kind of shelter me a bit and make sure that everything was rainbows and sunshine. Like, there are no, they wanted me to go through life almost colorblind. And that, in its turn, harmed me, as I also, as Perry brought up, faced a lot of shame. And so because of my interests, while both of my parents were military, we moved around quite a lot. So I got a lot of exposure to a number of different groups, hobbies, and while also being born in Germany, having that distinction when I would tell my peers where I was born, they would often shame me for that. There's at the time, I guess the closest thing that some children would associate Germany to was Nazis, and so that would often be a name that I was called when I was a child. So, and then with my father, he spent a lot of time in South Korea. He was often stationed there, so we were constantly just involved in the culture of South Korea. And as I began to grow, being within the Black community, whenever I would be enrolled in a predominantly Black school, I often faced a lot of shame. I was often questioned with, both of my parents can't be Black. There's no way. You're too light, or you speak too white. And I had no way to combat that. I didn't know, what it meant to be Black or to be white or to fit in. I thought I was just American. And so having those issues and having nowhere to kind of have an outlet or discuss it or find answers, I don't know if that was probably the cause, but I developed anxiety, depression, and I had a lot of social anxiety. And again, video games, comic books, anime helped me be able to find a place and find characters that I could attach to. And so as I continued, through adulthood, my family structure being military, my father was very much very strict. I had a very strict upbringing, and there was no kind of thought that I would do something within a creative field. My father said that, you just be a starving artist. There's no way for you to do that. So I didn't even have a community to kind of tell me that, oh, you draw, you should totally be an animator, or you should be a cartoonist, or you should go into video games, if not for my godmother, who encouraged my sister to pursue a career in games. And with my sister doing that, her school sent her to a conference called the Game Developers Conference, or GDC, and I was able to then volunteer at that conference, which was my door into the game industry. And so now, now in the game industry, it's how I try to make sure that I'm as visible as possible. We hear a lot of negativity around being a token, but I think that if you are doing it for yourself and you present yourself as a marginalized group in those spaces, you may be that one person that you may have needed to see, or someone may have needed to have seen as a child. Because again, I didn't have a thought that I could be in the game industry as a child. It was not a thought when I was pursuing a career or picking a major in college. And as well as going to college, I went to a historically Black college, or an HBCU, Bowie State University, and that was almost my world-shattering moment where I began to really peel off the layer that there is so much trauma in the Black community. And that is why I had also faced a lot of microaggressions just from in the community. I harbored a lot of anti-Blackness growing up because I felt that how we were portrayed in media or in TV or in cartoons were always criminals or thugs or someone who stole something. And I was like, I'm not that. None of my family members are like that. Like, how can I be that? Like, obviously I must be something else. I can't be Black. And so, or I would want to be the good Black. Like, so you have that,
Urkel.
yes, I wanted to be kind of like almost a model minority. It's like, well, if I am going to be classified as Black, like, look how good I am. Look how well I speak. Look how, I don't cause any trouble. And so, but you think that a lot of that is also from any of these communities that are under the pressure of systemic racism and a systemic system. It's like, even without any of the people there, this system is still going to harm them unless they have someone that can redirect them. And again, it does need to be as early as childhood. I am grateful for the amount of outlets that I had as a child, and even into adulthood. Something that I had that was almost a traumatic experience for me that made me reflect on that is that a coworker had mentioned, with the popularity of BTS, oh, you're into BTS, and I had asked my younger brother if he was into it, and he was like, no, that's for white people and black people who don't know they're black. And I was kind of just taken aback. I didn't know how to respond. I was shaking. And my friend is Puerto Rican while also being mixed with a number of different, minority groups as well in his family. So he thought, oh, it's just a joke, it doesn't matter. And it was very harmful to me because it erases, the interest that black people could be. It puts us in a box, and it's just like, why do we always have to fit into one group or one thing that we can like? And the fact that it erases the fact that I've been so enamored and so involved in even just Korean culture since childhood, and that I have so many other likes. So it's like, I almost felt shame that he wouldn't have corrected his younger brother. And so again, we still have children that grow up with that mindset and then also try to stigmatize other groups. And so I think it's just, again, being mindful and having the courage to also speak up and correct situations or ask them why they think this way, so that, again, they will challenge their own thoughts. And again, as I'm going through my working in the game studio, I mean, again, we have so many avenues that you could do within the industry, within audio, within composing music, being a Foley artist, finance, facility management. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. So wrap it up, my friend.
Wrapping it up, again, having the ability to just put myself forward within a studio, to be able to speak up and ask them to make changes to characters or bring better representation, it is so impactful to our youth. And so, if you have the opportunity to do so, I would encourage, you to try or to reach out to someone who can do that.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Mark, who is the co-founder of Dewata Comics. And please tell us a little bit about your third culture, since Natasha, myself, a lot of us here on the panel have experienced that. What does third culture mean? Press the button. There you go.
Hello?
There you go.
So, first of all, hi everyone, my name is Mark. I'm, I guess, a filmmaker, a visual effects artist, and most recently founded a diverse comics company. Originally started as Filipino-American, but then realizing really it didn't reflect every aspect of how I grew up, exactly like what Natalie talked about. We switched it to specific, to more a broader umbrella, because you have to be okay with every part of you. And let me get into that. First of all, I want to give Lorraine a big thanks for assembling this panel, because I didn't realize how much we had in common between Perry and Natasha's stories, and we don't all belong in the same culture yet for the very same reasons. We're all here because we have shared experiences even more than we realized. Going with what Perry was saying, I definitely fell into the whole, because I was a minority that wasn't as visible, I needed to find so much perfection in myself that it was a whole lot of expectations that I had to put on. I think for the longest time, just to kind of go back into who I am and how I grew up, I was born Filipino, but I moved to the Middle East when I was 6, and I spent most of my early childhood in the Middle East, moved to Australia, and then moved here. What I found about myself during those years was I became a really good mimic. What I mean by that is I tried to take on the characteristics so I would never become other. In fact, one of the things that I was going to say when I first arrived here was when I first arrived here, I spoke in a particular way because I did learn how everybody spoke in Australia. And I'm not just saying that for that reason, but basically I did learn that as a coping mechanism. But going back into that, it took me really a long time, I would say quite honestly, the last 3 to 5 years to become comfortable with who I was in every single sense. And I don't mean this to be anything but just the statement itself. So I found myself in the film industry, and obviously it took an Emmy win. It took an Emmy win to be comfortable with everything that who I was. I'll give you an example of why that was. We were nominated for the first time in 2015. When that happened, we didn't win. Nobody paid attention to you. 2017, we got nominated again. And then everybody paid attention to you, hung on to every word you said. And from that moment on, it gave me a license to be okay with everything. But it shouldn't have to take that, is what I'm trying to say, right? It's like that is a very big expectation on any child, despite of a lot of the grandeur that brings. A child, no matter how young, should never have to feel that expectation. But that is what happened to me. So therefore, when that happened, I took initiative beyond the shows, the popular things that we work on, to then go back into the culture and find stories that nobody's ever been, nobody's ever shared. Like for instance, as Filipino Americans, we are the second largest growing Asian population in the United States, but yet our representation on film and television is always, let's just say, lacking or somehow diminished because we look like some other cultures, so you have to be mixed with other folks, or a lot of people from our culture tend to play other people in other cultures as well, and that's not right. And so here's an example. Lorraine, do you have the characters that we put in? And so one of the characters that I was so proud to actually unveil yesterday is the character you see on the screen left. To give you an idea of why that was, the character on the far right, far screen right, was a character that I developed when I was 15, 17, around that time range. I wrote my 17-year-old psyche in there as a third culture kid, queer, and all of that in between, but I put a white face in it because I wasn't comfortable putting myself in that situation. Fast forward to today, I finally found the courage to say that, you know what, that's not right. In fact, I rewrote the character. Everything about the character remains the same from an internal level because it was my psyche. It was all of the trauma that I went through. But now it's representing the face of what I look like. In fact, the artist that we picked, or I picked, was because she was so fantastic at not just doing colors really well that represented people of color, but down to the features as well, where you could see that not everybody has like a comic book nose or specific eyes, and I really loved that she was able to bring that out in her illustration. But it took those long years and a lot of, let's just say, prepping myself up professionally to be successful in my mind to get to that point. But I also know that, just as Natasha said, my hope is that by putting this new character out, it gives somebody else, a younger version of myself or somebody like myself, to see themselves in it and give them the license to be proud of who they are, not for later, but for now. And I'd say that it would probably give them a whole lot more courage growing up authentically as opposed to waiting for the right moment to accept themselves for everything that they are. So
Thank you very much.
that is my spiel. Feel free to follow us at Diwata Comics, I guess, to find out what kind of stories we tell, but also to discover new stories from different points of view, from Philippine mythology to stories about third culture kids who are really just trying to figure themselves out.
Quick.
So I just want to jump in quickly for a quick second here talking about the cosplay. I want to introduce you all over here to Demetrius Holt, aka Hellspawn Cosplay. So you got questions on that? This is a good guy to talk to. He is responsible for bringing us a He-Man with a fro.
Wait,
On to you, Sunny.
Wait, that's you. All right. I have you guys switched here. So it's Aaron next and not Sunny. So Aaron drove all the way here from New Mexico, and he is the Chief Creative Officer of Native Reality Press and Indigenous Entertainment, and he created the Native American or Indigenous indie pop ComicCon, so to speak. And thank you so much for being here, and please tell us about yourself and what tribe you're from and why you decided to create Red Planet Books and Press and the struggles.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'm Aaron Cuffey. My family indigenously comes from the Montauk, Shinnecock, and Wampanoag tribes from the East Coast, Massachusetts, and New York. I guess the thing for me to sort of dive into is the reason I'm sitting on this panel, the reason I had an interest is because in the interest of supporting BIPOC students, I am Black, I am Indigenous, I am a person of color, and 9 out of 10 of you looking at me all day today and right now are like, huh, really? And that's in reflection of much of what everyone has been discussing as it's led down the table. is why I've gotten into what I do, is because that's been my life, is not really finding a place, seeing representation, garnering any understanding. Like I said, my family is from the East Coast. We moved to New Mexico into one of the most affluent and whitest counties in the United States, situated in the middle of the first minority majority state in the country that has been minority majority throughout the entire history of its existence, which is why it wasn't a state until 1912, because there were, quote, not enough white people, according to the Congress, and has the second highest per capita Native American population, second only to Alaska. Not a particularly high black population, unfortunately, but a very high indigenous population. Through living there in my adolescence, started working through some of the issues and identity problems, shame, etc., that I think we've all been discussing. And part of what got me through it is pop culture, art, and comic books. The X-Men, Star Trek, sci-fi, fantasy fiction, places where things like that either didn't matter or were addressed in a healthy way that really still doesn't get reflected very well in our real world circumstances, whether that be fiction or nonfiction. Open and honest conversations about the multivariate layers and complexity of interaction and interrelation between ethnicity, race, gender, sex, and other aspects of identity and personhood. In genre fiction, as I think many, if not all of us know at things like ComicCon, it can be addressed and be beautiful and glorious to everyone, to the people that are part of those cultures as well as not part of those cultures, people walking in parallel within the context of those stories. And to me, that became a hugely important thing to follow and pursue. So it led me to becoming a teacher, supporting students myself, and then eventually with my business partner, Dr. Lee Francis, founding Red Planet Books and Comics, Native Realities Press, the Indigenous Pop Expo, as places where we could curate, create, cultivate, and get into the hands of young people and wider audiences stories and representations they don't see in other places. I think whether you're talking about the indigenous population or any other so-called minority group in the context of the United States, the stories that are told, the aspects that are exploited for entertainment, more often than not, are not in the hands of the people who are being portrayed as characters in those stories. And if or when they are, they're still being manipulated by a superstructure that determines what's going to be entertainment, what has value to someone else, and more often than not, that's trauma, that's something painful. And rather than being relevant or specific trauma or relating to very specific things that happen to a group, a family, or a culture at large, it's we made up a cool version of that, and yeah, your dad got killed in a liquor store shooting because that's what we see makes sense for your people. Now go forward with the story. And what we try to do is create a space as well as create stories where there's 100 more options than that, where Native people aren't necessarily riding horses, they're astro-engineers trying to create new colonies on Mars. Sorry, I won't keep going with the examples because we're running out on time, but that's the value of supporting BIPOC students. Thanks.
Thank you. And up next we have Sunny Chargaloff, and he flew all the way from Guam, which is like a 22-hour flight. So I appreciate your time, Sunny. You know, I'm originally from Guam, so you know it's dear to my heart that he is here.
Hi everyone, my name is Sunny Chargaloff. I am a Chamorro, which is the indigenous people of Guam. Does anyone know where Guam is at? All right, so Guam is a very tiny island in the Pacific. Guam is U.S. territory, so I'm a U.S. citizen. I can't vote for president though. We are kind of denied some of those rights, but we are still considered U.S. citizens. Really briefly, a quick breakdown of Guam history is that for about 300 years we were occupied by Spanish rule. During World War II, we were occupied by the Japanese, and a lot of our people were forced to not speak our native language, which is Chamorro, and they were forced to speak Japanese, learn Japanese, bow like a Japanese person would. And after the war, the U.S. liberated us, and we became very westernized. I'm a comic book freelance comic book artist. When I was a kid, my dream was to draw comics. I really loved the X-Men. It was my dream to draw for Marvel Comics, but the more I get work with local people on Guam, Chamorros, the more I feel like there's a lot of stories to tell from our culture. I currently have 3 projects that I'm working on that deal with that, with promoting Chamorro culture. One project is currently in the works, and it was an opportunity I had to pull in a writer so that we could tell a Guam story, and that's something that we are working on publishing right now. And I have a personal project that I'm working on with actually somebody who lives in San Diego. I met him in 2018, and he is not from Guam. He's never heard of Guam. So there's a lot of back and forth between us. I'm sending him pictures, photos, and filling him in on what he needs to know about the story. We're co-writing the story together, and I'm going to illustrate. But that is my way of trying to promote Guam culture and the culture of the Chamorros.
All right.
And thank you very much.
And and last but not least, David Hooker. And David and I met through a mutual friend of ours. And David, tell us your story. And how do we, I feel like, we've talked about like how important it is for children to be supported. And let's talk about like what's the good thing that can happen when children are supported because of their background being Black, Indigenous, a person of color. What's your experience feeling supported?
Absolutely. Okay. My name is David Hooker. I'm at the Walt Disney Company. I work in products for StarWars.com, Disney.com, Avatar, a lot of .coms. My background comes initially from arts and education, professionally anyway, initially arts and education, and then I moved into entertainment specifically. My story is a little bit different than a lot of folks, and I do sort of cherish some of the encouragement that I received from my parents. There was a lot of that kind of colorblindness in the sense that, well, it's kind of hard to hide. You're a Black kid. I see it, you see it, we see it, y'all see me. But outside of that, it was more so, we encourage you to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do, and that encouragement, regardless of your skin tone or things like that, they kind of, very early on, they recognized that I was inclined academically. And so at that point, there was sort of this law of rising standards in my home where, okay, well, you've shown that you can do it, so now let's move you to the next step. And I think that growth, without them, really specifically knowing it, allowed me to be able to continue to grow in whichever areas that I was in. Which is why I kind of early on didn't necessarily not see myself in characters. I picked the little Captain America pin as an example. They were blonde-haired, blue-eyed characters that were heroes, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll be that guy, right? Like my favorite Power Ranger is the red one, the Jason, the red one, not Tommy. I don't talk about him. He did lose that fight, just so you all know. But that was who I was, because I identified with that root story of this character. And so beyond that, though, going to a historically Black college is taught me about the lack thereof of representation, and it also taught me that there are a lot of people who didn't have that connection. So there's this disconnect that is created, and then there's this self-worth that is diminished because they don't have that connection. They don't have that pride in that character. They don't walk up and say, yeah, I'm the Red Ranger. They go, well, I guess I gotta be Zach, and I guess I gotta learn to dance. And so that is not the most ideal situation. But what I can say in my personal experience, right, like taking that pride and then taking the additional pride that I developed at that historically Black school and attaching it to where I am at today, I've been able to navigate, network. I've met great friends and colleagues through like GDC, and those sort of prideful moments have allowed me to connect and then help others be pulled up as well. So I've been able to be a mentor. I've been able to build programming within the Walt Disney Company to help support the career development, the advocacy and awareness of DEI spaces, and all of that, right, is a bit of an extension of the pride that I was able to have as a kid, right? And so there's a lot of instances that I've seen where children, very small children, don't get heard. So I think the biggest takeaway that I would leave anyone with is awareness. Be aware of what you're presenting to kids. When you are aware, you think about, am I presenting them a token black character? Am I presenting them multitude of characters so that they can see themselves in this guy, or maybe it's Ant-Man that they really like, or, and then go a couple Ys deep is the second piece. So a lot of times we'll run into some hiccups, or we'll have some disconnect with other people or other groups, and I think that's because we haven't taken the time to go a layer beneath where we're at, and a couple layers down you start to see that we do have similar love and notions, but it's the fact that we need to evaluate why and what instances, whether those be institutional, whether those be ideological, that are causing these imbalances or disconnects. So once connected and once filled with that sense of pride and identity, I feel like kids get a great opportunity to be successful. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much. And here are the recommendations jumping on what David is saying. Learning about ableism, racism, transphobia, biases, and implicit bias inside of you, creating ownership and agency of masks. And so Perry and I just recently did a talking to therapists, how important it is to recognize with Black, Indigenous people of color, we need to have masks sometimes, even when we're not our authentic self, so that we are not killed, we are not harmed, and so it's a protective factor. And it's very important as educators, we must understand that, be trauma informed, to understand restorative justice. We need to create safe spaces, check our own privileges, advocate for those who are in need, listen, validate, communicate, be willing to speak up, hold others accountable, educate others about the impacts of masking, and understanding where shame is in people's lives, doing research in marginalized communities, understand masking and code switching when somebody talks differently from their friends, their group of friends where they're comfortable with, and how they are in front of the classroom, for example. Creating community is very important, especially those who feel isolated and alone. We've seen a lot of this during COVID. And once again, being trauma informed, understanding what restorative justice is. Thank you again so much. Usually we have time for questions, but we do have some giveaways up here. So if you feel like you have questions and we don't have time and we're walking out, do we have time to take some questions? No, we're getting kicked out. So we're gonna have to walk towards the elevator. But thank you again so much, guys. Thank you for having us.